12, 2025. It's year 4 day 289 since the full invasion began. A warm welcome. I greet you to the Daily Situation Report, top notch. This really is the best community one could wish for. In just 2 days, we've hit 11% of our donation goal. You all are amazing. Of course, this will benefit everyone who survives the war, thanks to your donation. Just a reminder, for every new subscriber, I personally donate another 4 cents as long as the campaign is running. With 100,000 subscribers, I think we'll hit a solid 4-digit amount. The largest donation gets a signed one-tag tick flag. Details are always at the top of the video description. Recently, there was a Russian territorial gain at Volchansk, which allowed them to take control of the northern part of the city within a few days. It's basically about everything north of this body of water, with these 3 bridges that connect both parts of the city here. All of that is now under Russian control, and they advance slightly further south. By the way, this yellow area here, I haven't even updated it yet, but this has been recaptured by the Ukrainians. So in the end, you can just cross this out, and that's what the map looks like now. And there's a new video here, because the Russian soldiers are explicitly complaining that they've been attacked by the Ukrainians here again. This is about soldiers from the 82nd Russian Motorized Rifle Regiment who are complaining here about the situation. Because in the recordings, it is said that their so-called base has been completely burned down, everything has been destroyed down to nothing, and nothing is left. So this points to a complete hit on a position, probably after a precise drone or artillery strike. Another plane crash has occurred in Russia, and An-22 has crashed. According to previous reports, the crew is said to be dead. The aircraft lost contact after the last radio communication around 11 a.m. After that, debris was discovered in the Uban Reservoir near the village of Ivankovo. Search and recovery operations are underway. Of course, there are no official details about the search and certainly not about the cause. The crew size is also unknown. There is talk of actually 7 people, but basically, it is one of the largest propeller planes in the Russian air fleet, which usually carries 5 to 6 people, as the crew that is. That means if they report 7 losses here, it could be that they had an additional passenger with them who was not part of the crew. But what the Russians were transporting there is unclear. However, one thing is certain. The series of plane crashes in Russia is not over. Poor maintenance and staff shortages worsen the situation. And as I've said many times before, we're going to see this more and more often. And as we can see, we are indeed seeing it more and more often. The Russians always claim on their propaganda television that they're acting with surgical precision when they attack targets in Ukraine. But that's obviously a lie, since we've been seeing for years that they hit pretty much everything. Whether it's a children's hospital, an apartment building, or the next shopping center, instead of a military target. To better see the effects of this so-called surgical precision, you can take a look at Bakhmut on Google Maps. A few hours ago, the first satellite images were released showing the Russian world after liberation. Let's take a quick look together. Let's first look at our situation map. Bakhmut, that's located a bit further to the east, right here. We recall the Wagner Group was especially active here then. That was basically, at their peak, the battle for Bakhmut, and also the last major battle they took part in as an independent military group. That was months ago, and since then the Russians have made no progress. But that changes nothing. Back then they tried to encircle the city, but it didn't work. At some point, the Wagner Group, due to heavy pressure from the Ministry of Defense and the disputes they had with them, they invaded the city's east and captured it gradually. Was this the last battle or one of the last? That then took place here at the Children's Hospital in the western part of the city. And that's exactly what we're going to look at now on Google Maps. This here is basically the Children's Hospital. It's actually a bit shocking, I have to say. You can still see the old Google Street View images and actually compare them with the new satellite images. So, as I said, this is the area we're talking about, the Children's Hospital in the west of the city, which I just showed. And this is what it actually looks like on the map now, right here. It's hardly recognizable anymore, as you can see here. The roof has collapsed and the surrounding buildings have also collapsed. From the hospital's park or garden we just saw which was on this side. That's gone too. You can't even tell there was a garden. Now everything is just brown, gray, and bleak, just like the rest of the city. Here as well, almost no houses in the nearby residential neighborhoods still have roofs, or where you can even tell what used to stand underneath. I picked out 2 more places that were quite interesting. On the one hand, there's this city park on a pretty nice sunny afternoon that you can see here. Back here is an interesting archway and a distinctive statue, much like this flower-filled area. Here is a very distinctive building with almost nothing remaining on the actual map. This is the distinctive building I just talked about, or what's left of it. All the flowers used to be here. This was the flower park, and here is the archway, or what's left of it. We see a lot of debris all around here. As the last place worth seeing, I chose this one. This is a train station in the city, not the main one, with a typical turquoise or aquamarine roof, which is located here, and basically this very noticeable parking lot and turnaround area here in front of the building. It's actually quite easy to spot from the air here in the middle of a desert full of destruction. The tracks remain at the station, but that's all that's left. The blue roof is gone. You can just barely make out that there used to be an entrance hall here, with the 2 side buildings or the 2 extensions on the sides. But everything else is destroyed, even here. The small kiosk that stood here has been destroyed just like almost everything else in the city. If we take a look all the way to the east, it's quite interesting, because here you basically have the old image, the old satellite image, this square here, and here is the new one. And here you can clearly see the path of destruction. This is what Bakhmut looked like before the Russians liberated it. And here on the left side, you can see what it looks like now. Bakhmut is just one example. Nearly every city the Russians have taken here looks like Bakhmut. In the end, everything they've captured is destroyed. And of course, you have to ask yourself, what's the point of destroying all of this? What's the point of sacrificing so many of their own people? Just to conquer a piece of land that's been completely destroyed, and where there will hardly be any economic growth or people left who would want to rebuild it, especially as long as it's occupied by the Russians. Consider other regions occupied by Russians without much resistance, such as Donetsk. As a city, not a region, we see the living conditions there are very bad, and Russians are fighting inside. Yeah, they couldn't even really conquer that, more or less, through their separatist movement. People over there don't have running water, and the Russians don't give a damn, because those are basically just territories they've conquered. Even in Russia's heartland, we can see in many villages the state of transportation, education, and cultural access. Many villages and towns in Russia still appear as they did a century ago, and people there live much the same way. If you don't care for them, they can't achieve a higher standard of living. So you probably can't expect that in the areas Russians just took over in Ukraine either. Axios reports that Ukrainian President Zelensky is under growing pressure from the United States to agree to larger territorial and further concessions as part of Trump's so-called peace plan. A United States official contradicted this and emphasized that Washington has put just as much pressure on Putin to soften his maximal demands. For Kiev, the situation is still delicate. Discussing territorial concessions would seem like capitulation at home and might encourage Russia's aggression instead of stopping it. At the same time, United States pressure, whether real or only perceived, is increasing nervousness in Europe. I don't think any pressure has been put on Putin. If you'd actually done that, the war would likely be over and you wouldn't be watching this. So while the Americans still believe that Putin is interested in peace, he issues a new decree. Putin has signed a decree for reservists in Russia to be called up for exercises in the coming year. That hardly fits the narrative. He is not seriously striving for peace. Instead, it seems more like a systematic replenishment of what he has lost so far. Moscow keeps the war machine running, while in Washington, they continue to pretend that the conflict can be frozen with kind words. For Ukraine and Europe, this means expecting more pressure and fewer illusions. But Europe's problem is also its lack of action. Many meetings and conferences yield results, but little changes, and that has a cost. But what do we expect, especially when we've banished many decision makers to Brussels, who were incompetent for their individual countries, but too well connected to be completely cut off. But that's another topic. Russians intensify near Pokrovsk. The south from Munerath to the artillery zone is now Russian-controlled, while the north remains heavily contested. Near Rivne, at the Red Pin, there is a geolocation where Russian soldiers are holding up 2 flags. But this does not mean that the north of Pokrovsk is lost, since at the Blue Pin, Ukrainian soldiers are raising a flag. And that happened on the same day. So it seems like some kind of northeast movement of Russian soldiers out of the city in order to really close the encirclement this time. Why do I say that? Because the Russians have claimed for weeks it's closed, but it isn't. Nevertheless, the situation is very bad for the Ukrainians. From what I can see, that's less than a kilometer that remains open between the 2 fronts here. That obviously makes things much worse for the soldiers in Munerath. The Ukrainian Security Service of Ukraine, reports major damage at Russia's Temryuk liquefied natural gas port in Krasnodar. Following a December 5th drone attack, the facility burned for 3 days. Images became available only today. The Security Service of Ukraine reported that 20 of 30 fuel tanks were destroyed. A tank car burned on the plant grounds, and both an intermediate storage facility and the stormwater overflow station were also struck. This is, of course, a heavy blow, as the outage affects an important hub for fuel handling on the Black Sea. It forces Russia to take longer routes, make detours, and add protection for the remaining infrastructure. In the short term, there's a risk of regional supply shortages. Repairs involving personnel and equipment. In the medium term, more forces will be needed here again, which Moscow can hardly afford because they will be missing elsewhere. Special thanks to Algin Crew channel members, especially Lieutenant Colonel Renicky. Thank you for listening. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you at the next Situation Report.